Hello, and welcome to the Earth's Library. This is our quiet space for reflection, a place to explore the great, hidden stories of our planet at a pace the world no longer seems to allow. Find your comfortable position. Let the day's momentum gently subside, and allow your mind to settle with the soft, steady rhythm of your own breath. We are about to begin a journey, not just to another time, but to another state of being, to a world governed by forces we have learned to ignore. Tonight, we begin with a question that probes our comfortable modern existence. What does it mean to truly feel the weather? Not as a number on a screen, or as a mild inconvenience that might ruin a picnic, but to feel it as the central, defining force of your life. We live our lives in carefully controlled boxes of glass and steel, where the seasons are tamed by the quiet hum of a thermostat. But for nearly all of human history, the weather was not a forecast to be consumed, but a vast, living entity to be understood. Winter, especially, was not a season, but a predator, and survival depended on an intimate, almost forgotten form of knowledge. Before we travel to that time, let us ground ourselves in this one. As you settle into your space, perhaps watching the afternoon light of a Saturday begin to soften, feeling the day begin its slow turn toward evening, consider the simple feeling of the air around you. You might notice the temperature beginning to drop, a gentle coolness that signals the coming of night. For us, it is a minor change, a signal to find a sweater. But now, try to imagine a cold of a completely different magnitude, a cold with weight, a cold with teeth, a cold so absolute that it can freeze cattle standing in the fields like statues of ice, a cold that can steal the breath from your lungs and the life from your body before you even realize you are in danger. That is the world we seek tonight. In the nights and weeks to come, we will journey back to the American West in the winter of 1886, a winter so catastrophic it would be given a name, the Great Die-Up. We will learn the language of survival that was spoken then. We will explore the ingenuity of the homes people built from the very earth itself, the log cabins and the sod houses of the treeless plains. We will discover why wool was a miracle and cotton could be a death sentence. We will understand how people stayed warm by burning the land's most plentiful and most surprising resource. And we will witness how one single, brutal season of snow and ice brought the great cattle empires to their knees, forever changing the landscape and the story of a nation. This is a story of hardship, but it is also a story of incredible resilience, a testament to the quiet wisdom that is born only in the face of impossible challenges. If you wish to travel back with us, to feel the bite of that frontier wind and understand the true meaning of warmth, then subscribe to the Earth's Library and join us on this journey into the heart of the great cold. Our journey begins not in the howling chaos of a blizzard, but in the deceptive stillness that came before it. To understand the great winter, we must first understand the season that set the stage for the tragedy. We must travel back to the summer of 1886, a time of profound and dangerous optimism on the Great Plains. The land itself, a vast ocean of grass stretching from horizon to horizon, was seen not as a complex and fragile ecosystem, but as a factory for producing beef, an endless resource for a nation hungry for expansion. For years, this system had worked. Mild winters and plentiful grass had fueled a boom in the cattle industry, creating fortunes for ranchers who operated on a simple, audacious premise: turn thousands of cattle loose onto the unfenced plains and let nature do the rest. The land, they believed, would always provide. But a landscape is not a machine. It is a living thing, with its own history, its own limits, and its own language. And in the summer of 1886, the land began to speak of hardship. The sun that year was not a gentle source of life, but a relentless, oppressive force. Day after day, it beat down upon the plains, baking the soil to dust and withering the sea of grass to a brittle, yellowed straw. Rain, which had always come, simply stopped. Rivers shrank in their beds, and creeks vanished entirely, leaving behind cracked, sun-scorched earth. Then came the fires. Ignited by lightning or a stray spark from a passing train, they swept across the prairie in great, devouring waves, leaving behind a blackened, barren landscape under a perpetually hazy sky. For those who knew how to listen, these were not random events, they were warnings. The land was broadcasting a message of distress. The ancient rhythms were broken. Indigenous peoples whose ancestors had survived on these plains for millennia understood. They saw the early departure of migratory birds, a silent, feathered exodus weeks ahead of schedule. They watched beavers working with a feverish intensity, building their dams higher and stockpiling more wood than in any season in memory. Even the animals of the settlers seemed to sense the change. The shaggy coats of the cattle began to grow in thicker and earlier than usual, a primal genetic memory of deep cold stirring within them. Nature was preparing for an ordeal, but many of the newer settlers, and especially the wealthy cattle barons from the East and from Europe, had not yet learned the language of the land. Their faith was placed in ledgers and market reports, not in the behavior of birds and beavers. They saw the drought and the fires as a temporary setback, a brief interruption in the inevitable story of progress and profit, never imagining it was the opening chapter of a catastrophe. The faith of the cattle barons, however, could not change the physics of the atmosphere. The warnings of the land were soon echoed by the sky. In November, far earlier than anyone expected, the first storms arrived. They were not the gentle snows of a normal winter, but something heavier, more menacing. The sky took on a strange, bruised color, and the world fell into a profound and expectant hush. The first flakes did not drift, they descended with purpose, a silent, invading army that would not stop for 4 months. For those who had prepared, a deep worry began to set in. For those who had not, the suffering began. Let us now leave the vast wind-swept plains and step inside one of the countless small pockets of human existence scattered across that immense landscape. Let us enter a cabin, a simple box of hewn logs, perhaps no larger than a modern bedroom. The gaps between the logs are chinked with a mixture of mud and moss, a desperate attempt to keep out a wind that can find any weakness. There is no insulation in the walls, no double-paned glass. There is only a single room where you will cook, eat, sleep, and endure the long months of confinement. Your day begins not with the gentle ringing of an alarm, but with a slow, reluctant return to consciousness in a world of half-light and brutal cold. As your eyes open, the first thing you notice is the air. It is sharp in your lungs, so cold that each breath makes your nose sting. You can see it, a white cloud that plumes before your face with every exhale. You are in bed, but it offers little of the comfort we know. It is a simple wooden frame, pushed against the wall to draw what little warmth might remain in the logs. Your mattress is a sack stuffed with straw that rustles and shifts with your every movement. The only real comfort comes from the sheer weight of the coverings piled on top of you, layers of heavy wool blankets and animal hides prepared during the warmer months. You do not leap out of bed. In this time, the morning ritual begins with a moment of quiet resolve, of summoning the courage to leave this small island of relative warmth. Because hours ago, the fire in the small iron stove died, and the temperature inside your cabin is now barely higher than the temperature outside. The world has become a single, unified kingdom of cold, and your small shelter is merely a temporary outpost within it. You can see the windows from your bed, though you cannot see through them. Overnight, the moisture from your own breath has frozen against the glass, coating it in a thick, opaque layer of frost. Delicate, feathery patterns have bloomed across the pane, nature's artistry creating a beautiful illusion of a forest where there is only a sheet of ice. It would be a thing of wonder if it were not a stark reminder of the temperature that awaits you. You reach one hand out from beneath the covers, a brief test of the air, and instantly regret it. The cold does not just touch your skin, it bites at it, a sharp, stinging sensation that quickly gives way to an alarming numbness. This is a cold that feels like it could shatter. Knowing that delay only prolongs the inevitable, you finally throw the covers back. The act requires a physical and mental bracing, and the cold rushes in to claim the warmth your body has collected through the night. But you have learned. You do not reach for clothes that have been hanging in the open air, stiff and frozen. Instead, you pull on the garments you tucked into the foot of your bed last night. This is one of the first and most vital lessons of winter survival. Your own body heat can be a tool, used to pre-warm the very layers that will protect you. It is a small act of foresight, a piece of wisdom earned through bitter experience. Even so, the moment your feet, protected only by wool socks, touch the bare plank floor, a shock of cold shoots up your legs. There is no time to waste. You hurry across the small room to the iron stove in the corner. It sits cold and silent, its ashes a gray, lifeless dust from the night before. But beside it, you have prepared. There is a small, neat pile of kindling, thin strips of wood, slivers of bark, perhaps a twist of dried grass. And most importantly, you have kept your matches close, perhaps in a pocket or a small tin, ensuring they remain dry and ready. With fingers that are already growing stiff and clumsy, you arrange the kindling inside the stove, add a few slightly larger sticks, and strike a match. The tiny flame that sputters to life seems impossibly fragile against the vast, oppressive cold of the room. You cup your hand around it, shielding it from the slightest draft, protecting it as you would a newborn. In this world, fire is not a convenience. It is life itself. And in this moment, all of your hope, all of your will to survive, is focused on this single, flickering point of light. You touch the fragile flame to the edge of the dried grass and bark. For a moment, it seems the cold might simply snuff it out, that the energy required to burn is more than the kindling possesses. But then a wisp of smoke curls upwards, followed by a tentative orange glow that begins to spread through the carefully laid tinder. The fire is born. A quiet sigh of relief escapes you, a breath you didn't realize you were holding. It is the first victory in a day that will be full of small, crucial battles. You feed the infant flame with care, adding slightly larger sticks one by one, watching as it grows in confidence, its crackle becoming a steady, reassuring sound. Finally, you add a few small logs, and the cast iron of the stove begins its slow, steady work of absorbing and then radiating the heat. It will be some time before the cabin feels anything close to comfortable, but the psychological battle is won. Hope has been rekindled. Now, when we picture this scene, our minds instinctively supply an image of a great stack of firewood piled outside the cabin door. And for settlers in the wooded mountains or eastern forests, that would be true. But here on the Great Plains, we must confront a fundamental reality that shaped every aspect of survival: the almost total absence of trees. The very material needed for a pioneer's fire was often the rarest commodity for hundreds of miles. So what did they burn to stay alive? The answer lay in the great herds that defined the plains. The buffalo. The settlers burned what the buffalo left behind. Dried buffalo dung, known as buffalo chips, was the lifeblood of the treeless prairie. To our modern sensibilities, it sounds primitive, even repulsive, but in reality, it was a stroke of ecological genius. Once dried by the relentless sun and wind, these chips became dense, efficient units of fuel. They burned remarkably hot and with a slow, steady consistency, producing very little smoke or odor. They were everywhere, free for the gathering, a renewable resource provided by the landscape itself. When the great buffalo herds were hunted to near extinction, their place was taken by cattle, and cow chips replaced the fuel of old. You open the small door of the stove and add a few of these humble, dried cakes to the flames. They catch quickly, and soon the stove is radiating a serious, life-giving heat. You hold your hands out, palms open, just inches from the hot iron, and a feeling of almost overwhelming gratitude washes over you as the warmth begins to seep back into your stiff, aching fingers. It is a simple, primal pleasure, the slow, painful, wonderful return of feeling to limbs that the cold had tried to claim. The fire is now a stable, breathing presence in the corner of the room. The immediate, desperate fight against the cold has been won, and a fragile bubble of warmth is beginning to expand into the space. Outside, the world is still wrapped in the profound darkness of a winter morning. The sun will not rise for another hour, a reminder that the days are short and the hours of light are precious, to be filled with the endless work of staying alive. In this pre-dawn quiet, your world has shrunk to the four walls of your cabin. This small room, perhaps no bigger than a modern guest bedroom, is not just a home, it is your entire universe. It is the place where you cook, eat, sleep, and, on the days when the weather becomes too violent to dare the outside world, it is where you will work and wait. If you are in a wooded area, these walls are made of logs, felled and shaped by your own hands. The gaps between them are stuffed with whatever the land provided. A mixture of mud, moss, or clay that forms a brittle defense against the wind. It is an imperfect seal. In the worst storms, you can feel the wind probing at these weaknesses, whispering through tiny, unseen cracks, and leaving little drifts of snow on the floor. But for those on the vast, treeless plains, even logs were a luxury. Many settlers there built their homes from the only material that was truly abundant, the earth itself. They lived in houses made of sod. These soddies, as they were called, were marvels of necessity. Using a special plow, settlers would slice the prairie into long ribbons of sod, thick with the tangled, ancient root systems of the grasslands. These ribbons were then cut into blocks, like great earthy bricks, and stacked to form the walls of a home. A sod house was, in a very real sense, a piece of the landscape, reassembled into a human shelter. And because it was made of the earth, it was a remarkably effective insulator, staying cooler in the brutal summer sun, and, most importantly, holding warmth far better than a drafty log cabin in the winter. But this intimate connection to the land came at a price. Your home was never truly sealed from the outside world. A fine sifting of dirt constantly rained down from the ceiling. Insects, mice, and even snakes could make their homes within your very walls. And in a heavy rain, a terrifying reality would set in. Your house, the very thing that was meant to shelter you, could begin to dissolve around you. Whether your home is made of wood or earth, the stove is now the center of your world. Its heat is pushing back against the lingering cold that still hides in the corners and along the floor. The small space begins to fill with a thin haze of smoke from the imperfect chimney, a familiar scent you have come to associate not with uncleanliness, but with life. The flat iron top of the stove is now hot enough to cook on, and your attention turns from the fuel for the fire to the fuel for your body. You set a heavy cast iron pot onto its surface. Inside is water, which you may have had to melt from a bucket of snow, and a handful of dried beans that have been soaking overnight to soften. If you are fortunate, you add a small, precious piece of salt pork. This is not for flavor alone, it is for the fat, the dense, slow-burning energy your body will need to generate its own internal furnace against the cold. This simple breakfast will take a long time to cook, simmering for hours while you attend to other chores. In a winter like this, food is not about taste or variety. It is a matter of thermal dynamics. It is about consuming the maximum number of calories needed to maintain your core temperature, with the minimum expenditure of precious fuel to cook it. The diet shifts entirely. The light foods of summer are replaced by heavy, nutrient-dense staples. Diets rich in fats and proteins become essential, not for building muscle, but for the simple biological act of generating heat. The indigenous peoples of the plains had perfected this science over centuries, creating what was perhaps the ultimate survival food, pemmican. It was a remarkable invention, a mixture of lean meat, often buffalo, which was dried and pounded into a powder, then mixed with rendered fat and sometimes dried berries for vitamins. A small, dense cake of pemmican could sustain a person through the harshest conditions, providing a long-lasting, complete nutrition that was lightweight and would not spoil for months or even years. Settlers and fur traders, recognizing its profound effectiveness, quickly adopted it. For those without this knowledge, winter survival depended on their own stores, harvested and preserved from the seasons of plenty. Your own small pantry might contain smoked venison or dried beef, and root vegetables like potatoes and turnips stored in a cellar beneath the floorboards, or if you have no cellar, buried in straw-filled boxes under your bed, using the minimal warmth of the cabin to keep them from freezing solid. Every calorie, every scrap of preserved life from the summer is now a weapon in the long war against the cold. With breakfast simmering on the stove, a promise of internal warmth for the hours ahead, you must now prepare your external defenses. Before you can face the world outside, you must don your armor. In this era, staying warm was not a matter of throwing on a single thick coat. It was a science, a strategic and deliberate system of layering designed to trap body heat and manage moisture. Each layer had a specific purpose, and the choice of material was not a matter of comfort, but of life and death. The entire system began with the layer closest to the skin. This foundation was the long underwear, or long johns, typically made of wool or flannel. This was not the thin, sleek thermal wear of today, but a substantial garment that covered the body from wrists to ankles. Its primary function was to create the first and most important pocket of insulation. By trapping a layer of air directly against your skin, it allowed your own body to heat that air, creating a personal, wearable atmosphere that served as a buffer against the biting cold of the outside world. Upon this foundation, the rest of the armor was built. A heavy shirt of flannel, or, again, the miracle fabric of the frontier, wool. Here we must pause to understand the single most important rule of winter clothing in the wild, a piece of wisdom so critical that to ignore it was to risk death. That rule was, Wool saves, and cotton kills. To the touch, cotton may feel soft, but in the cold it becomes a treacherous enemy. The moment cotton gets wet, whether from melting snow or your own sweat, its fibers collapse and it loses all of its insulating properties. Worse, it becomes an active conductor, wicking precious heat away from your body with terrifying efficiency. The saying on the frontier was stark and true: cotton kills. Wool, on the other hand, was a marvel of natural engineering. Its fibers have a unique, crimped structure that creates countless tiny air pockets. Even when wet, wool retains much of its loft, and therefore its ability to insulate. It could absorb a significant amount of moisture before it even felt damp against the skin, continuing to provide warmth when any other fabric would have failed. This singular property made it the most valuable material in the long war against the cold. Over the wool shirt, you would add a wool vest, giving your core an extra layer of protection, keeping the vital organs at the center of your body safe and warm, before finally shrugging on a thick, heavy coat, woven from the densest wool, or, if you were truly fortunate, made of fur. A coat of wool or fur protects the vital core, but the cold is a patient and strategic enemy. It will not assault the fortress directly. Instead, it will attack the outposts: the hands, the feet, the head. These are the places where the frostbite war is won or lost. And so, the ritual of layering continues. On your feet, you pull on not one, but several pairs of thick wool socks, creating a soft, dense cocoon of insulation. Then come the boots, made of sturdy leather that has been painstakingly waterproofed with beeswax or animal fat. This is a constant, essential chore, for wet feet are not just an inconvenience. They are the beginning of a catastrophic failure of the entire system, a breach in the armor that can lead to frostbite and ruin. For your hands, you choose mittens over gloves. This is another piece of simple yet profound frontier wisdom. A glove isolates each finger, forcing it to fight the cold alone. A mitten, however, creates a shared space, allowing your fingers to huddle together, pooling their warmth and protecting one another from the onslaught. It is a lesson in community, practiced on the scale of a single hand. Finally, you pull a heavy wool hat down over your head, making sure it covers your ears completely. An unprotected head is a chimney through which the body's precious heat escapes at an astonishing rate. The hat is the final seal, the capstone on this wearable fortress you have spent the last several minutes carefully constructing. You are now ready, encased in layers of wool, hide, and ingenuity. You move to the door. You pause for a moment, hand on the latch, gathering your resolve. You know what is waiting for you on the other side. You have seen the sky. It has that heavy, oppressive look that the old-timers have learned to read as a warning. A storm is coming. You open the door, and the world outside hits you like a physical blow. It is not just the temperature, which may be 20 or 30 degrees below zero. It is the wind. Here on the open plains, there are no mountains, no great forests to break its momentum. It is a pure elemental force, an invisible river of cold that flows uninterrupted for 1,000 miles, gathering speed and power. It scours the landscape, and it scours you, cutting through your layers of clothing with a relentless, surgical precision, seeking out the smallest gap, the tiniest weakness in your armor. Your first task of the day lies just a few dozen yards away, across the open ground that separates your cabin from the small barn or lean-to that shelters your livestock. In summer, this is a pleasant 30-second walk. In the grip of this winter, it is a journey. Each step is an effort, and the wind is a constant physical opponent, pushing against you, stealing your breath, and trying to tear the heat from your body. You lean into it, head down, and press onward toward the other living beings who depend on you. They are not merely farm equipment or future meals. They are your partners in this struggle. The cow that provides milk, the chickens that give precious eggs, the horse or mule that represents your only real power over the vast distances of this land. You are bound together in a fragile web of mutual dependence. The shelter is not warm, not by any modern standard, but as you slide the wooden door open and step inside, the sudden shocking absence of the wind feels like a kind of grace. The air is still frigid, filled with the rising clouds of the animal's breath, but the relentless assault has ceased. They have huddled together through the night, their collective body heat creating a small pocket of endurance. The air smells of hay and manure, an earthy, living scent that feels almost pleasant when compared to the sterile, deadly purity of the wind outside. Your first chore is to bring them water. You take a heavy tool to the trough, where the water has frozen solid overnight, inches thick. The rhythmic, percussive shock of shattering the ice is one of the defining sounds of a frontier winter. Once they can drink, you give them their feed. You dole out the hay not with generosity, but with careful calculation. This is the great, silent anxiety of the season. Will the feed last until the spring grass returns? To give too much is to risk starvation in the final desperate weeks of winter. To give too little is to risk the animals weakening and succumbing to the cold. It is a constant, difficult negotiation between the needs of today and the fears of tomorrow. As you work, your own body begins to send its warnings. Despite the layers of wool and the physical exertion, a deep, aching cold begins to seep into your fingers and toes. It is not the sharp sting of the initial exposure, but a dull, insistent pain that signals the early stages of frostbite. You know not to ignore it. You have seen neighbors who did, men who paid for a few extra minutes of work with blackened fingers and toes that would never heal right. True survival is not about reckless endurance. It is about the wisdom to respect the cold's power and to know when you must retreat. The animals are cared for. Now you must care for yourself. You stumble back toward the cabin, the wind at your back now, pushing you toward the small beacon of smoke rising from your chimney. The short distance that was a battle on the way out is now a desperate scramble for safety. You cross the threshold and slam the heavy wooden door shut, the sudden silence inside a deafening relief. The howling of the wind is instantly muffled, reduced to a distant, mournful sound. Your small, smoky, one-room cabin, which felt like a frozen cage just an hour ago, now feels like the most profound sanctuary on earth. You stand for a long moment by the stove, letting its blessed heat soak through your layers of wool, feeling the life it offers seep into your very bones. The painful, prickling sensation of blood returning to your numb fingers and toes begins, a feeling old-timers call the screaming mimmies, a testament to how close you came to the edge. Your breakfast has been simmering this whole time, filling the air with the rich, earthy smell of beans and pork. You eat quickly, standing by the stove, not out of hunger alone, but for the deep, restorative power of the hot food. It warms you from the inside out, replenishing the energy you have already expended in the day's first battle, and fortifying you for what is to come. Because as you eat, the world outside is changing. The wind is no longer just a steady, powerful force. It is beginning to rage. Its howl rises in pitch, becoming a desperate shriek that seems to tear at the very logs of the cabin. Through the frosted windows, the world is becoming a blur of motion. The sky is no longer visible. There is only a swirling, chaotic vortex of white. The storm is closing in. You know you have only a few minutes left to prepare. Every old story, every piece of hard-won frontier wisdom tells you what a storm like this can do. It doesn't just bring snow, it erases the world. The blizzards of the Great Plains could create a whiteout so total, so disorienting, that all sense of direction vanishes. People had been found in the spring frozen solid, just yards from their own back doors, having gotten lost in the blinding chaos while trying to reach their barns. They had wandered in circles, blind and helpless, until the cold took them. You will not make that mistake. You grab a coil of heavy rope, secure one end to the iron door latch, and plunge back out into the maelstrom. The wind rips the air from your lungs. The snow is not falling down, but driving sideways, a horizontal blizzard of tiny stinging needles of ice. You cannot see more than a few feet in front of you. Keeping your grip on the rope as it pays out behind you, you stumble toward the barn, your only guide, this lifeline back to safety. You secure the other end to the barn door and follow it back, your heart pounding with the terror of that brief blind journey. This rope is now the single most important object on your homestead. You make 2 more desperate trips, this time to the fuel pile, hauling armloads of wood or buffalo chips back into the cabin, stacking them high beside the stove. You know this may be the last time you can safely open the door for days. Back inside for the final time, you bar the door, stuff a few extra rags into the gaps where the wind whistles loudest, and take a mental inventory. You look at the pile of fuel, at your sacks of flour and beans, at the smoked meat hanging from the rafters. You do the grim arithmetic of a siege. How long can you last? A few days? A week? The calculation is a cold, stark reminder of your absolute isolation. And then a strange and terrifying thing happens. The wind, which has been screaming for the last hour, suddenly falls silent. A heavy, profound stillness descends upon the land, as if the world itself is holding its breath. And then, through the window, you see it begin. The full, unimaginable fury of the storm is unleashed. The world outside your cabin is no longer a landscape. It has dissolved into a single, indivisible substance of wind and ice, a roaring, featureless void. All that is left of your reality are the 4 walls of your shelter, and the storm is testing them with a living fury. The wind no longer flows around your home. It lays siege to it. It screams around the corners, a high, thin sound like something in agony. It probes and pushes at the door, making the wooden latch rattle in its housing. It finds every tiny, invisible crack in the chinking between the logs, forcing fine, powdery snow through the walls. You watch as impossible little drifts begin to form on the inside of your windowsills, a constant chilling reminder that the barrier between you and the storm is permeable, imperfect. The entire structure groans under the immense, shifting pressure, the logs contracting in the plummeting temperature with sharp, cracking sounds, as if the cabin itself is crying out. With the outside world erased, your existence shrinks to a small circle of light and warmth cast by the iron stove. Life is now governed by a single, overriding imperative. You must not let the fire go out. You pile the fuel in, the wood, the buffalo chips, far more generously than you normally would. Rationing is a concern for a normal winter. This is a crisis. The cold outside is so immense, a force of pure entropy that seems to suck the heat through the very walls, that the fire must be waged like a constant, active battle. Heat is no longer a comfort. It is life itself, the only thing standing between the delicate 98-degree reality of your body and the absolute zero that the storm is trying to impose. As the brief winter day dissolves into a long, featureless night, you light a single candle or an oil lamp. Its small, flickering flame creates a tiny golden bubble of light in the vast, roaring darkness, a circle so precious and fragile that it feels like the most important thing in the universe. Time itself begins to warp. With no sun, no moon, no visible sky, the familiar rhythms of day and night vanish. The only clock is the hunger of the fire. You feed it, you watch it, you melt snow for water, and you wait. The hours stretch and blur. And in this timeless, sensory-deprived confinement, another, more insidious enemy begins to stir. Cabin fever. It is a malady of the mind, born from isolation, monotony, and fear. A deep restlessness takes hold, an irritable energy with no outlet. The crushing silence between the gusts of wind can become as maddening as the noise itself. The mind, starved of external stimulation, can turn inward, chewing on anxieties until they grow monstrous in the flickering shadows. To survive the blizzard, you must not only protect your body from the cold, but you must also protect your mind from itself. You turn to the small, repetitive tasks that can anchor a drifting consciousness. You take out a piece of leather harness that needs mending, and your hands, clumsy with cold, engage in the slow, rhythmic work of pushing an awl and thread through the stiff material. Each stitch is a small victory against chaos, a tiny mark of progress in a world where all other progress has stopped. You might take up a piece of wood and a knife and focus your entire being on the act of carving, on the feel of the blade shaving away a curl of wood. Or perhaps you simply sit, listening to the storm, and your thoughts drift across the white emptiness to your nearest neighbors, a mile or two away. Are they safe? Is their roof holding? Do they have enough fuel? In this moment of profound isolation, you feel the invisible threads of community more strongly than ever. You know that if your supplies were to fail, and if you could survive the journey once the storm breaks, they would share what little they have. It isn't charity. It is the fundamental law of this land. Everyone understands that survival is a collective act. You survive together, or you are buried alone. This shared understanding, this knowledge of a human connection that the storm cannot erase, becomes its own kind of warmth, a small, steady flame against the encroaching darkness. The thought of your neighbors is more than a fleeting comfort. It is an anchor. In this vast and isolating landscape, community was not a luxury, but an essential piece of engineering, as vital to survival as a solid roof or a well-stoked fire. The people who settled this land understood a simple, profound truth. The environment was too powerful to be faced alone. This understanding was the invisible architecture that held their world together. It was built during the brighter, warmer months in acts of collective labor that forged bonds of trust and mutual obligation. You might remember the summer, the raising of a neighbor's barn, where dozens of hands accomplished in a day what would have taken a single family months. You might recall the autumn harvest, a time when entire communities moved from farm to farm, a tide of shared work that ensured everyone's crops were brought in before the first frost. These were not just social gatherings, they were rehearsals for the crisis of winter. They were the weaving of a safety net, a web of reciprocity that you could now feel, even if you could not see it, stretching across the miles of snow-covered prairie. This settler model of community, forged by necessity, was a recent invention. For the Native American tribes of the plains, this collective approach to survival was an ancient and deeply sophisticated way of life. Their entire social structure was elegantly tuned to the rhythms of the seasons. Summer was a time of dispersal, as bands followed the great buffalo herds across the open grasslands. But winter was a time of deliberate, strategic gathering. Entire extended families and clans would come together in sheltered river valleys, places that offered protection from the worst of the wind and access to firewood and water. These winter camps were not scenes of grim endurance, but of vibrant social and spiritual life. It was here, in the long, dark nights, that the elders would bring out the tribe's winter count. This was a pictorial history, a chronicle of the people recorded as a spiral of images on a large buffalo hide. Each image represented the single most significant event of a given year. The winter count was a living library, a tangible link to the ancestors. As the keeper of the count pointed to each symbol, he would recount the story it represented: a great battle, a successful hunt, a harsh winter, the birth of a leader. It was a ritual that collapsed time, connecting the children huddled by the fire to the long, unbroken line of those who had come before them. In the face of a blizzard that threatened to erase the world, the winter count reinforced a profound truth: that their lives were part of a story far greater than this one moment of hardship, giving them a sense of continuity and purpose that was a powerful defense against despair. The settler communities were a more recent and varied experiment, a mosaic of different cultures and experiences colliding with the harsh realities of the plains. A family of Scandinavian immigrants, for example, might survive the winter in greater comfort, having brought with them an ancestral knowledge of cold weather construction, building homes with double walls insulated with moss or sawdust. Their German neighbors might burn through their fuel more slowly, having introduced the highly efficient cast iron stove, a piece of technology far superior to the open fireplaces of many American-born settlers. But for those who arrived from milder climates, from England or the American South, the learning curve was brutally steep. There are heartbreaking accounts of these families, unprepared for the intensity of the cold, who survived their first winter only because a more experienced neighbor taught them how to bank a fire, how to dress in wool, or shared their own precious food stores. Community here was not just about sharing labor, but a desperate, life-saving transfer of knowledge. It was a crucible where everyone's past experience was tested, and the wisdom that worked was quickly shared, becoming part of the new collective intelligence of the frontier. And so, in your small cabin, as the blizzard rages on, you are alone, but you are also a part of this great unseen collaboration. Your small struggle echoed in dozens of other homes across the frozen darkness. The short, gray imitation of a day is now over, though it is difficult to tell precisely when it ended. The roaring darkness outside simply deepened, the world beyond the walls becoming a place of pure sound and conjecture. You eat a simple dinner in the small circle of lamplight, the howling of the blizzard providing a constant, menacing soundtrack. With the meal finished, a new set of rituals begins, those that will prepare you for the long, cold siege of the night. Sleep will not be a simple act of surrender. It will be a carefully managed strategic retreat, and your bed must be fortified like a final bastion. You begin by piling every available covering onto the simple wooden frame. Heavy wool blankets, quilts painstakingly stitched during the warmer months, and cured animal hides are layered one on top of another until the bed becomes a dense, heavy nest. But this alone is not enough. The cold of the deep night is so profound that it can leach the warmth from a body even through this mountain of insulation. And so you turn to a more active form of defense, a way of capturing the fire's energy and taking it with you. You select several smooth, flat stones and place them in the embers of the stove until they are almost too hot to touch. Then, using a piece of cloth, you carefully wrap each one and tuck them deep beneath the layers of your bedding. These pockets of stored heat like miniature time-release suns, will radiate a gentle, life-sustaining warmth for hours, fighting back against the encroaching chill. With the bed prepared, you turn your attention to the most critical task of the night, banking the fire. To let it burn freely would be to exhaust your precious fuel supply by midnight. To let it die completely would be to wake in a frozen tomb. The solution is a delicate art, a piece of wisdom passed down through generations. You carefully arrange the glowing coals in the stove, pushing them into a compact mound. Against them, you place the largest, densest log you have, one that will burn slowly and consistently. Then you do something that seems counterintuitive. You gently cover the entire arrangement with a thick blanket of ashes from the day's fire. This layer of ash acts as a superb insulator, starving the coals of just enough oxygen to prevent them from burning, but not so much that they are extinguished. They will smolder in a state of suspended animation, a seed of fire preserved through the darkness, ready to be resurrected in the morning. Finally, you climb into your fortified bed. As you lie there, listening to the storm scream its fury, you do not expect the uninterrupted sleep of the modern world. Your body, like that of nearly all humans before the industrial age, is attuned to a different, older rhythm of rest. You will likely fall into a first sleep, a deep slumber that lasts for several hours. But then, in the deepest part of the night, you will wake. This is not a sign of anxiety or insomnia. It is a natural, peaceful period of quiet wakefulness. And in this world, it is also a gift. In this still, dark hour, you can listen to the fire, judging its state by the faint sounds it makes. You can rise briefly from your nest of warmth to add a single, small piece of wood to the embers, an offering to ensure the heart of the cabin continues to beat. You are not fighting the night, but participating in it, a vigilant guardian in a rhythm of sleep that is perfectly adapted to the demands of survival. Your descent into sleep is not an escape from the storm, but a different way of experiencing it. The howling of the wind and the percussive rattling of the door are no longer external threats. They become the raw materials for the theater of your mind. Frontier diaries from these long, isolated winters often speak of dreams with an astonishing vividness, as if the mind, starved of new sights and sounds, begins to generate its own worlds with a feverish intensity. You may dream of summer, of walking through waist-high grass under a warm, benevolent sun, the dream sensation of its heat on your skin so real that it feels like a memory being relived. Or perhaps the sounds of the blizzard weave themselves into your subconscious, the shriek of the wind becoming the whistle of a distant train, a symbol of a world far from this lonely outpost. Or the deep, groaning creak of the cabin walls transforming into the footfalls of some great unknown beast circling your shelter in the darkness. In this state, you are traveling, not across the snow-covered land, but through the vast, untamed landscapes of your own memory and imagination. It is a necessary journey, a way for the spirit to remain free when the body is a prisoner. Then, in the deepest, coldest hour of the night, you drift back to wakefulness. It is not a jarring alarm that pulls you from sleep, but a gentle, natural ebbing of the tide of slumber. You find yourself conscious, lying perfectly still in your nest of blankets. The storm outside may be raging with the same intensity, but for a moment, a lull between the great gusts of wind creates an illusion of profound silence. The cabin is utterly dark, save for the deep, pulsing orange glow that escapes from the small air vent on the stove door. a sign that the heart of your home is still beating. The heated stones tucked in your bed have cooled, but still radiate a gentle, comforting warmth. This is the quiet hour of the second sleep, a liminal space that the pre-industrial world knew intimately, a time for quiet thought, for prayer, for simply being present in the deep heart of the night. This wakefulness is not idle, it has a purpose. You slip out of the heavy warmth of your bed. The shock of the cold floor is immediate, a sharp reminder of the stakes. Moving silently through the darkness, you approach the stove. You use a small poker to gently scrape away a small section of the insulating ash, revealing the slumbering ruby-red coals beneath. They are alive. Into this glowing core, you place 1 or 2 small dry sticks of wood. It is not a full feeding, but an offering, a small meal to ensure the embers survive their long vigil until morning. You cover them again with the ash blanket and retreat back to the sanctuary of your bed, the brief, vital task complete. Back in your cocoon of wool and fur, you do not immediately fall asleep. Your mind is calm, alert, and in this quiet, solitary moment, your thoughts naturally turn to the future. They turn to spring. You do not dream of it as a fantasy, but as a certainty, a destination you are slowly, patiently traveling toward. You conjure the sensory details of the thaw, the sound of water dripping from the eaves, a gentle, percussive music that will signal the end of the long silence of the freeze. You remember the smell of damp earth as the snow recedes, a rich, living scent that promises new growth. You picture the first impossibly green shoots of grass pushing their way through the mud, a sign of nature's indomitable resilience. This is not naive optimism. It is the deep, realistic wisdom of a person who lives by the cycles of the earth. It is the understanding that the seasons are a wheel that always turns. The knowledge that winter, no matter how powerful or terrifying, is not a permanent state, but a passage. This certainty, this faith in the cyclical nature of the world, is the ultimate anchor. It is the knowledge that even this great and terrible storm, this world-erasing blizzard, is temporary. And with this thought held firmly in your mind, you feel the gentle pull of the second sleep, and surrender to it, your spirit grounded not in the howling present, but in the quiet promise of the dawn to come. The second sleep releases you back into a world that has not changed. There is no dawn, only a subtle lightening of the gray, swirling chaos beyond the windows. The storm's voice has become the only sound in the universe, a constant, low roar, punctuated by violent, shrieking gusts that make the cabin tremble. Another day has begun, though the word feels meaningless, a relic from a different reality. The morning ritual, which yesterday felt like a desperate battle, now feels like the only sane thing in a world gone mad. It is a liturgy of survival. You leave the warmth of your bed, the shock of the cold floor, a grimly familiar greeting. You approach the stove and, with practiced care, resurrect the fire from the precious, slumbering embers you so carefully preserved through the night. As the first flames take hold and begin to push back against the chill, you notice a new and strange beauty on the interior walls. The moisture from your own breath, from the steam of melting snow and cooking food, has frozen overnight, coating the logs in a delicate, crystalline rime that sparkles in the growing firelight. It is a beautiful, chilling portrait of your own life force, captured and frozen by the immense power of the cold. Once the fire is stable, you move to the window, rubbing a small circle clear of the thick frost to peer outside. The world you knew is gone. The path to the barn, the familiar line of a distant fence, the very shape and contour of the land have been completely erased. buried beneath a deep, seamless blanket of white. The wind has sculpted the snow into vast, wave-like drifts that press against your cabin, reaching halfway up the walls and covering the small window entirely on one side. Your home is no longer sitting on the landscape. It is being slowly interred within it. Your world has physically shrunk. The vastness of the prairie has been replaced by the claustrophobia of being buried alive. Your cabin now a tiny, fragile ark, adrift on a frozen, featureless ocean. In this timeless, placeless existence, the only way to remain sane is to create your own time, to impose a rhythm upon the chaos. Your life, once governed by the sun, is now governed by a new and simpler clock, its hands marking the cycles of essential tasks. The first cycle is that of the fire, the constant pulse of your survival, demanding to be fed at regular intervals. The next is the cycle of water, the slow, laborious process of hauling in buckets of clean snow, placing them by the stove, and waiting for them to melt into the day's supply for drinking and cooking. Then there is the cycle of food, the simple, slow-simmering meals that divide the long, featureless day into manageable segments. And finally, there is the cycle of vigilance, the periodic moments you spend simply listening, trying to interpret the storm's changing voice, feeling the vibrations through the floorboards, hoping to sense a weakening, a sign that the siege might soon end. At some point, in what you guess to be the middle of the day, the shrieking of the wind subsides for a few minutes into a steady, roaring howl. This is your chance. You know the animals in the barn cannot survive long without you. You bundle yourself in your layers of armor and open the door to the maelstrom. Your lifeline, the guide rope you strung before the storm hit, is your only connection to the world. You grab hold of the stiff, frozen rope, your mitten sticking to it for a second, and pull yourself out into the blinding, disorienting whiteness. You cannot see the barn. You can only feel the rope in your hands, a single, tangible thread of reason in a world of pure chaos. You follow it hand over hand, your feet sinking deep into the snow, the wind tearing at you. The brief time inside the barn is a whirlwind of frantic activity, breaking the new ice on the trough, doling out the precious rationed feed, checking the animals for any sign of weakness, before you must turn and face the terrifying journey back, your own life once again dependent on that single frozen rope. Back inside, the door barred, you lean against it, your body trembling with cold and adrenaline. The day's one great and necessary risk is over. The routine can now resume. The days and nights of the blizzard begin to merge into a single, unbroken continuum of sound and confinement. Your routine, the fire, the water, the perilous journey to the barn, the quiet indoor tasks, becomes the only structure in a world that has lost all of its own. But while your personal struggle is focused on this tiny island of survival, a much larger, landscape-scale tragedy is unfolding. The story of this winter is not just the story of one family in one cabin. It is the story of an entire way of life being brought to a sudden, catastrophic end. The winter of 1886 to 1887 was not just another harsh season. It was a historical turning point, an event so devastating that it would be given a name that echoed with grim irony: the Great Die-Up. To understand the scale of this disaster, we must first understand the dream that preceded it. The decade after the Civil War had seen the birth of the great cattle empires of the West. It was an industry built on a foundation of boundless optimism and what seemed to be an infinite resource: the grass of the Great Plains. The business model was breathtakingly simple. Investors, many from the East Coast or even Europe, would purchase thousands of longhorn cattle in Texas, drive them north to the unfenced grasslands of Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas, and simply turn them loose. These vast, semi-wild herds would roam freely, fattening themselves on the rich native grasses. Each year, cowboys would conduct a great roundup to brand the new calves and gather the mature steers to be shipped to eastern markets. For a time, when the rains were plentiful and the winters were mild, the profits were immense. It was a romantic, swashbuckling era that created the enduring myth of the American cowboy. But it was a system built on a fatal gamble, the assumption that nature would always be benevolent. The great die-up was the moment that gamble failed. The stage had been set by the hot, dry summer, which left the grasslands scorched, and the cattle entering the autumn already weakened and underfed. When the first blizzard struck early and with unprecedented fury, the open-range system instantly transformed from a source of profit into a perfect engine of destruction. The free-roaming cattle, lauded for their hardiness, had no shelter to retreat to. There were no barns to block the wind, no supplemental hay to eat when the snow buried the grass a foot, then 2 feet deep. They were utterly exposed to the full, unrelenting force of the storm. The accounts of what happened next are apocalyptic. The cattle, blinded by the snow and driven by instinct, would turn their backs to the wind and simply drift for miles and miles until they encountered an obstacle. Often, this was the newly invented barbed wire fence, a technology that was just beginning to carve up the open range. These fences, designed to control the herds, became death traps, as thousands of cattle piled up against them and froze into grotesque, tangled walls of ice and hide. Entire herds were found frozen solid in sheltered coulees and river valleys where they had gathered for a final, futile attempt at finding shelter. Others simply lay down in the snow, too weak from hunger and cold to get back up. When spring finally arrived, the plains were littered with millions of carcasses. Theodore Roosevelt, who was then a young rancher in the Dakota Territory, lost more than half his herd and was nearly ruined financially. He would later write that the losses were crippling and that the devastation had forever taken the romance out of the ranching life. He was not alone. Fortunes that had been built over decades were wiped out in a single season. The great die-up was the death knell for the open-range era. The survivors, humbled and forever changed, knew they could never again place their faith in a gentle climate. The ranching industry was reborn, but in a new, more cautious form. Smaller herds, fenced pastures, and the laborious but essential practice of growing and storing hay for winter feed. The Wild West, in a very real sense, had been tamed, not by lawmen or settlers, but by the sheer, unforgiving power of the winter sky. You, in your small cabin, know nothing of this. You are not a character in a great historical drama. You are simply a person trying to live until tomorrow. The fall of the cattle empires, the redrawing of the economic map of the West, these are abstract concepts for a future you cannot yet imagine. Your reality is immediate, sensory, and absolute. It is the texture of the log walls, coated in a fine layer of frost. It is the rhythmic, hypnotic dance of the flames inside the stove. It is the weight of the wind pushing against the door, a constant physical pressure. And it is the deep, gnawing anxiety that comes with measuring your dwindling pile of fuel against the storm's seemingly infinite supply of fury. The days of the blizzard are not a story to be told later, but a single, unending moment to be endured. After the first few days of this confinement, a new and formidable enemy begins to emerge. It is not as immediate as the cold, but it is just as dangerous. It is the great, crushing weight of monotony. The storm erases all novelty from the world. Each hour is identical to the one before it. The view from the window never changes. The sound of the wind is a constant, maddening drone. The routine you established for survival, which at first felt like a comfort, can begin to feel like a cage. This is the true breeding ground of cabin fever. The mind, with no new information to process, can begin to turn on itself, spiraling into irritability, then lethargy, and finally into a deep and dangerous despair. The fight for survival now becomes a two-front war, one for the warmth of the body and one for the sanity of the mind. The most powerful weapon in this second war is purpose. The hands must be given a meaningful task, something to create a sense of progress when all other progress is impossible. You might turn to the simple, rhythmic craft of mending, the methodical push and pull of a needle through thick wool socks, the careful wrapping of thread around a worn axe handle. These are not just chores, but meditations. They are small acts of order imposed upon a world of chaos. Or you might engage in a more creative task, like making candles. The slow, careful process of melting tallow or precious beeswax, preparing a wick and dipping it again and again, watching the candle grow with each layer, is a way to create light, both literally and figuratively. In a world that has been reduced to a single roaring sound, the quiet, rhythmic click of knitting needles or the soft scrape of a carving knife against wood become a kind of music, a human counterpoint to the storm's elemental fury. When the hands are at rest, the mind must be allowed to travel. In the long, fire-lit hours, you might find yourself humming a song you haven't thought of in years. A simple folk melody your mother used to sing. The tune becomes a bridge, a pathway back to another time and place, filling the small, lonely cabin with the ghosts of love and memory. And then there is storytelling. Many of the Plains tribes held a deep belief that certain sacred stories, the great myths of creation, could only be told in the winter, when the snow covered the ground and the earth was sleeping. It was a time for turning inward, for remembering who you were and how the world came to be. For the settler, the stories might be different, but they serve the same purpose. You might tell yourself the story of your own family's journey west, recounting the details of the long, arduous trek. Or you might reach further back, to the tales of your ancestors in the old country. You populate the empty space with other voices, other lives. You remind yourself that your own story is part of a much longer one. Through these simple acts of culture, a craft, a song, a story, you build a second shelter, an inner fortress of meaning and memory. And in so doing, you survive not just the cold, but the profound emptiness it leaves in its wake. Days have passed in this way, a timeless cycle of fire and waiting, of small crafts and vast interior journeys. You have become accustomed to the storm's voice, its rhythms of rage and release, now as familiar as your own heartbeat. It has been the single defining feature of your existence. But then something changes. It begins with the sound, the constant, high-pitched shriek of the wind, the sound that has vibrated through the very logs of the cabin and the bones of your body for days, begins to lose its coherence. The monolithic roar fractures. There are now moments of quiet, deep valleys of silence that open up between the great roaring peaks of the gusts. At first, you think you are imagining it, your mind creating a pattern where none exists. But the lulls become longer, more frequent. the storm's voice is growing tired. It is a subtle shift, one that a modern person, accustomed to the constant noise of civilization, would never notice. But to you, whose entire sensory world has been reduced to this one sound, it is as loud and clear as a ringing bell. This change prompts you to move to the window, to the small patch of glass you have kept clear of frost. For days, this portal has revealed nothing but a churning, indecipherable vortex of gray. But now, as you peer out, the world is beginning to re-emerge from the chaos. The frantic, horizontal rush of the snow has ceased. The air is still thick with ice crystals, but they now seem to drift and hang rather than attack. In the moments of calm, you can begin to see texture again. You can discern the sharp, sculpted edge of a snowdrift, the vast, undulating contours of the new landscape the storm has created. The world is no longer a formless void. It is taking shape again. The profound emotional relief of this simple act, of seeing a defined edge, a solid form, is impossible to describe. It is the visual confirmation that the world you knew has not been permanently erased, that it was merely hidden and is now slowly returning. Your survival has depended not just on your physical endurance, but on your ability to read the language of the world around you. And now, you read these signs with the intense focus of a scholar deciphering an ancient text. You analyze the quality of the faint gray light, searching for any hint of warmth or clarity. You press your ear to a crack in the wall, trying to feel the direction of the lingering wind. You observe the way the smoke from your chimney behaves during the lulls, noting if it rises or is immediately beaten back down. This is the science of the survivor, a deep and practical meteorology born not from instruments, but from a lifetime of careful observation. Finally, after what seems like an eternity of this slow, gradual decline, the moment arrives. The wind gives one last mournful sigh, and then it is gone. The silence that follows is absolute, so profound that it feels louder than the storm itself. It is a physical presence, a heavy blanket of quiet that feels strange and almost frightening after days of constant violent noise. You hold your breath, listening. There is nothing, only the gentle, familiar crackle of the fire in your stove. Cautiously, you unbar the door and push it open. The air that greets you is so cold it feels like a solid thing, a pane of glass against your face. Your breath explodes in a thick, white cloud that hangs motionless in the air. But there is no wind. The violence is over. Above you, the sky has cleared to a pale, distant, achingly beautiful blue. And before you lies a world transformed, a pristine, silent, alien landscape of white, stretching away to a horizon that you can finally see once again. You take a first, cautious step out into this new world. The snow gives way under your boot with a soft, deep crunch, a sound that seems impossibly loud in the profound stillness. The beauty is overwhelming, almost intimidating. The sunlight, reflecting off the infinite crystalline surface of the snow, is blindingly white. Every familiar shape has been softened and rounded, buried under a gentle, sculpted blanket. It is a world remade, pristine and perfect. But you know that this beauty is deceptive. It is the beauty of a predator, calm and majestic after its kill. The air itself, without the wind to give it motion, feels ancient and solid. It is so cold that it hurts to breathe, and the inside of your nose freezes with each inhalation. Your first priority, now that the immediate threat of the storm has passed, is to assess your own small kingdom and the other lives within it. Your gaze falls on the barn, half buried in a massive, gracefully curved drift that the wind has carved against its side. The guide rope, your lifeline for the past several days, is still there, a thin, dark line sagging under the weight of accumulated ice. The journey to the barn is no longer a blind struggle against the wind, but a different kind of battle, a fight against the sheer physical reality of the snow. The work of breaking a new trail is brutal and exhausting. Each step is a monumental effort, lifting your leg high out of the deep powder, pushing it forward and plunging it back in. Within minutes, you are breathing hard, your own body heat turning the inner layers of your clothing damp with sweat, a dangerous condition you must carefully manage. You finally reach the barn door, digging it free from the drift, and slide it open. The animals greet you with restless movements and anxious sounds. They are cold, thirsty, and hungry, but they are alive. Seeing them, feeling their warm, living breath in the frigid air, brings a wave of profound relief. You are not the only survivor on this small patch of land. With your own homestead secure for the moment, a deeper and more urgent duty calls. The unwritten law of this frontier, the contract that binds all of its scattered inhabitants together, demands that you check on your neighbors. In this world, no news is never good news. Silence and isolation are things to be feared, and a community's strength is measured by how quickly it reconnects after a crisis. This is not a casual social call. It is a vital and potentially perilous mission. Your neighbors may be a mile away, or they may be 5. In this transformed landscape, with all familiar landmarks buried, that distance is a treacherous unknown. You prepare for the journey as you would for a military expedition, packing a small amount of food and ensuring your horse is fit for the trek, or that the bindings on your snowshoes are secure. Navigating this new world is a test of your deepest knowledge. You cannot rely on a map or a compass. You must rely on the map that is etched into your memory. You must read the subtle, almost invisible clues of the landscape hidden beneath the snow. The gentle slope that tells you a creek bed lies beneath, the specific spacing of a line of half-buried cottonwood trees that marks a familiar route. You use the low winter sun as your guide, its position in the pale sky your only true direction. To become lost now in this vast, silent wilderness of white would be a quiet and certain death. After what feels like an eternity of slow, arduous progress, you crest a small rise in the land, and you see it. In the distance, a thin, impossibly straight column of smoke rises against the pale blue sky. It is the most beautiful sight in the world. It is a signal, a sign, a declaration. Someone else is alive. Someone else has kept their fire burning. That distant column of smoke is a magnet, pulling you forward across the last stretch of the exhausting, snow-covered terrain. As you draw closer, you can begin to make out the details of your neighbor's cabin, another small, man-made island in this vast white sea. It is partially buried, just like yours, a testament to the universal nature of the ordeal you have all just endured. You call out, your voice sounding thin and strange in the immense silence, and after a moment, the door cracks open. The sight of another human face, etched with the same weariness and relief that you feel in your own, is a profoundly moving experience. The welcome you receive is not one of polite greeting, but of genuine, heartfelt joy. You are pulled inside from the blinding, sterile white world into the dim, smoky warmth of another family's sanctuary, the door quickly barred behind you to shut out the cold that is always waiting to reclaim its territory. The first few minutes are a silent ritual of thawing. You are guided to a spot by the fire, your heavy, ice-caked outer layers are removed, and a steaming mug of something hot, perhaps weak coffee or a tea made from herbs, is pressed into your hands. You sit, absorbing the heat, saying little, while the painful, prickling sensation of life returning to the frozen skin of your face and hands begins. Your hosts understand. They have felt this same pain. They know what it took for you to make this journey. In this world, hospitality is not a social nicety. It is a critical, life-saving procedure, a recognition of the shared battle you are all fighting. It is an act that says, "You are not alone. We are still here." When the immediate shock of the cold has passed, the conversation begins. It is not small talk. It is a debriefing, a solemn council of war between the leaders of two besieged outposts. The questions are practical, urgent, and stripped of all pretense. How deep is the snow on the north side of your cabin? Did your roof hold? How much of your woodpile is left? They trade information on the state of their dwindling supplies, the number of sacks of flour, the amount of salted meat hanging from the rafters, the health of the livestock. This exchange is a vital act of collective intelligence. You are pooling your data, trying to form a complete picture of the storm's impact and your community's chances of surviving the rest of the long winter. Every piece of information is critical. The news that a neighbor's well has frozen over is a cause for shared concern. The report that another family's cow has survived and is still giving milk is a small victory for everyone. Underneath this practical exchange runs a deeper, unspoken current. The sharing of this information is also a reaffirmation of an unwritten contract that governed frontier life. If you learn that your neighbor's flour is running low and you have a small surplus, you will offer it. This is not an act of charity, which implies a hierarchy of giver and receiver. It is an act of mutual investment. It is the clear, unspoken understanding that next month or next winter, the roles could easily be reversed. Your generosity today is a deposit into a shared bank of survival, from which you may need to make a desperate withdrawal in the future. This system of reciprocity, of mutual obligation, was the invisible mortar that held these scattered communities together. It was a pragmatic recognition that individual survival was a fiction. The only viable unit of survival was the community itself. As the weak afternoon light begins to fade, you know you must begin the treacherous journey home. You do not leave empty-handed. Your neighbor presses a small, precious gift into your hands. Perhaps a few eggs from their chickens, a food you have not tasted in weeks. It is a tangible symbol of the bond that has been re-established, a promise that even when you are back in your own silent cabin, you are not truly alone. The journey back to your own cabin is different. The physical path is easier, a trench of compressed snow that you broke on your way out. But the mental landscape has shifted entirely. You are no longer moving through a void, but through a known territory that contains another point of light, another pocket of human warmth. The terrible, absolute nature of your solitude has been broken, and this knowledge gives you strength. You carry not only the precious gift of a few eggs in your pack, but also the equally precious cargo of information, of shared experience. The sight of your own thin column of smoke rising in the distance is no longer just a sign of your own survival, but a confirmation that you are an active link in a chain, a functioning part of a community that is slowly, cautiously waking from its enforced hibernation. You arrive home as the pale winter sun begins to dip toward the horizon, painting the western sky in brief, spectacular streaks of pink and orange against the deep indigo of the coming night. Back within the familiar walls of your own shelter, you settle into a new phase of the winter. The immediate, violent crisis of the blizzard is over. but it has been replaced by something that can be just as draining: the long, slow, grinding endurance of late winter. The weather, which had been a monolithic force of wind and snow, now becomes fickle and treacherous. One day might dawn clear, still, and brutally cold, the air so sharp it feels as if it could crack. The next may bring a deceptive thaw. A warmer wind might blow from the south. The temperature might climb just above freezing, and for a few hours, the world will seem to come alive with the sound of dripping water from the eaves. This false spring turns the dry, powdery snow into a heavy, wet slush that clings to your boots and makes every step a struggle. It is a time of immense hope and equally immense disappointment, because you know that the night will bring the cold back, and this brief, watery reprieve will freeze solid into a landscape of treacherous, uneven ice. This endless cycle of freeze and thaw, of hope and retreat, begins to exact a toll. A deep, bone-wearying fatigue sets in, a product of the monotonous diet, the weeks of confinement, and the constant low-level stress of survival. The adrenaline that carried you through the worst of the storm is gone, replaced by a chronic ache in the muscles and a weariness of the spirit. Your animals feel it too, restless and thin after their long confinement in the dark, cold barn. This is the period when resilience is tested most profoundly, not by a sudden, terrifying threat, but by the seemingly endless continuation of the struggle. On the days that the weather allows, you throw yourself into the hard physical labor of recovery. This work is an antidote to the weariness, a way to reclaim a sense of agency over your world. You circle your cabin, meticulously inspecting the roof for any signs of damage from the immense weight of the snow. You check the chinking between the logs, finding new cracks and gaps that the wind has scoured open, and you mark them for repair. You begin the monumental task of shoveling, digging deep trenches around your home, not just for access, but to channel the water that will come with the final spring melt, preventing a flood. And during these tentative explorations of your property, you begin to see the first grim signs of the wider catastrophe. During a brief thaw, as the snow recedes from the highest point of a nearby ridge, you see a dark shape that does not belong. It is the frozen, still form of a steer, one that must have belonged to a neighbor miles away, a silent testament to the desperate, drifting journeys of the herds. You are beginning to read the first sentences in the tragic story that the spring will soon reveal in full.
The days that follow your reconnection with your neighbors are a mixture of grueling labor and intense observation. The world is a stark, minimalist masterpiece of white and blue. The snow, a brilliant, blinding sheet under the pale, clear sky, stretches away in every direction, its surface glittering as if sewn with diamonds. The air is so cold and pure that distances become deceptive, a far-off ridge appearing close enough to touch. The silence is profound, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of your own boots on the snow, the distant, lonely call of a raven, or the sharp, percussive crack of a tree branch finally succumbing to the immense weight of the ice. In this stripped-down world, every small detail, every tiny deviation from the norm is magnified, and you have learned to read them with the focus of a scholar. You are constantly reading the great, open book of the late winter landscape, searching for the first faint whispers of the spring to come. You notice the subtle changes in the texture of the snow itself. In the deep cold of the morning, it is a dry, loose powder. But by midday, when the sun is at its highest, the very top layer begins to change. The intense, unfiltered sunlight, even in the freezing air, is enough to cause a microscopic melt, which then refreezes in the afternoon, forming a thin, delicate crust. It is a fragile thing, but it is a sign of the sun's returning power. You have become a keeper of the sun's time. Each morning, you mark the precise spot on the horizon where it first appears, perhaps noting its position against a solitary tree or a distinctive rock formation. Each evening, you do the same at sunset, and day by day, you observe that the arc is widening. The amount of daylight is growing, not by hours, but by precious, almost imperceptible minutes. This is not a matter of hope, but a matter of physics and astronomy. It is a tangible, measurable proof that the long, dark night of the winter is truly beginning to recede. With this knowledge, and with the worst of the blizzards now likely past, a new kind of work becomes possible. The frozen ground and the slick surface of the snow, which were once deadly liabilities, can now be turned into assets. You might venture out with your horse and sled to a distant copse of trees to begin harvesting the firewood you will need for the following winter. The frozen solid earth makes it far easier to drag the heavy logs back to your cabin. This is an act of profound faith in the future. Or you might undertake the essential task of harvesting ice. You travel to a nearby lake or river, the ice now feet thick, and with a long saw, you cut out great crystalline blocks of it. These heavy blocks are hauled back and buried deep in a small insulated pit filled with sawdust. This frozen water, harvested from the depths of winter, will be your gift to your future self, providing a source of cooling and preservation through the heat of the coming summer. Even on the coldest days, as you work, you can feel the change. The sunlight on your face, though it provides little warmth, has a different quality, a new strength and intensity. And during the brief midday thaws, you can smell it in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of damp earth and decaying leaves beginning to emerge from beneath the sterile white blanket of snow. These are the most ephemeral signs, but they are also the most powerful. They are the first stirrings of a great sleeping planet. They are the quiet, undeniable promise that the immense frozen machinery of the world is slowly, ponderously beginning to turn once more toward life.
The lengthening days and the growing strength of the sun begin to instill a new feeling in you, one that has been a stranger for many months, a cautious, fragile optimism. The work of recovery, though exhausting, is a balm for the spirit. Every log hauled for the next winter's fire, every block of ice stored for the summer's heat, is a tangible vote of confidence in the future. The simple act of being outside for hours at a time, your face feeling the wan but strengthening light, feels like a resurrection. You have survived the siege. The great, monolithic enemy of the blizzard is broken and gone, and while the cold remains, it feels like a defeated, retreating army. But you have learned that winter's greatest deceptions are often saved for its final act. The transition to spring is not a gentle handover of power. It is a chaotic and often violent struggle between two immense forces. The first great thaw arrives not as a gentle dripping, but as a deluge. The temperature climbs, and the vast accumulated snowpack of the entire winter begins to release its captive water. The snow, once light and powdery, becomes a heavy, saturated sponge, and this creates a new and immediate danger. The roof of your small cabin and barn, which withstood the immense pressure of the wind, now groans under a different kind of threat, the crushing, almost unbearable weight of waterlogged snow. You must undertake the perilous task of climbing onto the slippery roof and, with a long rake or a simple board, pulling tons of this heavy slush away before the simple wooden beams that hold up your world give way and collapse. This meltwater creates another threat. The ground beneath the snow is still frozen as hard as iron for several feet down. The water, with nowhere to go,
begins to pool and move in great shallow sheets across the surface of the land, turning the pristine white landscape into a vast frigid swamp. The trenches you dug around your cabin now become critical lines of defense, channeling the freezing water away from your foundation. Further away, on the great rivers, a far more dramatic event is taking place. The thick, solid ice that has choked the waterways for months begins to break apart with deep, groaning, explosive sounds that echo for miles across the silent plains. Huge, jagged plates of ice, weighing many tons, are pushed and shattered by the pressure of the rising water, piling up in tremendous dams that can cause catastrophic flash floods for miles downstream. The rebirth of the rivers is not a gentle melting, but a violent, chaotic spectacle of immense power. As the water flows and the snow recedes, the grim truth of the great die-up begins to reveal itself in full. The dark shapes you may have seen on distant ridges are now joined by hundreds, then thousands of others. The landscape becomes a vast open-air tomb. Carcasses of cattle, frozen in the grotesque postures of their final moments, emerge from the melting snow. They are everywhere, piled against the fence lines, scattered across the open prairie, and collected in ghastly, tangled masses in the very riverbeds that are now coming back to life. A profound and terrible stench begins to rise from the land, a smell of decay that will hang in the air for weeks. It is a horrifying spectacle, and a sobering reminder of the thin line that separated your own fate from that of these countless creatures. Then comes the first true spring rain. It is not the life-giving shower you have dreamed of, but another trial to be endured. For the family in a sod house, it is a moment of acute terror. The thick, insulating roof of earth becomes a saturated sponge, and water begins to drip, then trickle, and finally pour into the single room of the home, turning the floor to mud and threatening the very integrity of the earthen walls. For you, in your log cabin, the rain finds every small crack and weakness that the winter wind and ice have created. You huddle inside your damp, leaking shelter, listening to the drumming of the rain on the roof. You have survived the dry, silent, absolute cold of the deep winter. Now you must survive its wet, noisy, and chaotic death. The rain, which felt like winter's final, cruel insult, eventually softens to a drizzle, and then ceases altogether. A profound and gentle quiet settles over the land, a silence not of frozen emptiness, but of saturated peace. And then, for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, the clouds begin to break. A shaft of sunlight lances through, and when it touches your skin, it is not the weak, watery light of the winter sun, but something new. It has a real and tangible warmth, a gentle power that seems to penetrate your damp clothes and warm you to the bone. You step out of your leaking cabin into a world reborn. The landscape is a muddy, chaotic mess of melting snow and pooling water, but it feels more alive than it has in months. The air no longer smells of ice and sterility. It carries the rich, complex, and wonderful scent of wet, thawing earth. The great ordeal is over. The tyranny of the cold has been broken. Your first act is one not of labor, but of liberation. You throw open the cabin's single door and the small wooden shutter over the window, an act that would have been a swift and certain death sentence just weeks ago. You let the mild, damp air and the warm sunlight pour into the small, smoky space that has been both your prison and your sanctuary. One by one, you drag the heavy, musty burdens of your confinement out into the light. The wool blankets, the animal hides, the straw-filled mattress, all of them are hung over a fence line or a low-hanging branch to be aired out, to have the long accumulated scent of smoke, fear, and winter confinement washed away by the sun and the breeze. This is not just a chore, it is a ritual of purification, a psychological necessity to reclaim your home from the ghosts of the long darkness and prepare it for the season of life. With the home being cleansed, your attention turns to the other survivors. You make your way to the barn to take a careful and deliberate accounting of the lives in your care. This is a moment of quiet, intense focus, an inventory of your living capital. You run your hands over the thin flanks of your milk cow, checking her health, her spirit. You examine your horse, looking for any signs of the weakness that the long, dark confinement can bring. You count your few remaining chickens, whose survival represents the promise of future sustenance. These creatures are not just assets, they are the seed stock from which the coming year's prosperity will grow. Their survival is a testament to your shared endurance, and you feel a deep, quiet gratitude for every single heartbeat that has made it through the long winter beside your own. From the living animals, your focus shifts to the living earth. You walk the small patch of land that is your claim, your future. The ground, which for months has been as hard and unyielding as iron, is now soft beneath your boots. It is a muddy, difficult walk, but you are not looking for an easy path. You are searching. You kneel down, pushing aside a patch of rotting snow, and you find it. A tiny, impossibly vibrant spear of green, a wild onion, or the first shoot of a hardy prairie grass, pushing its way up toward the light. You see the buds on the willow trees by the creek bed beginning to swell, a faint blush against the gray bark. These are not merely plants, they are miracles. They are the irrefutable physical proof that the great creative engine of the world has triumphed over the forces of stasis and death. And seeing them, feeling the soft, damp soil in your hands, you know it is time to begin the work again. The immense labor of spring lies ahead, but it is a labor of hope, a partnership with the awakening land.
The first signs of life you find in the soil are soon echoed on the horizon. For months, the landscape has been a static, empty canvas. Now, for the first time, you see movement in the distance. A lone rider, then two, silhouetted against the vast sky. The threads of the community, invisible and held only in thought for so long, are beginning to be woven together again in the physical world. The first meetings on the muddy trails are not casual affairs. Neighbors who have not laid eyes on each other since the first snows of November now stop and grasp hands. A long, silent moment of mutual recognition passing between them. They are survivors of a shared war, veterans of the long siege. They trade stories, not of the monotonous day-to-day endurance, but of the critical moments. The day the blizzard hit, the night the roof began to groan, the moment they feared their fuel would run out. They take an accounting of the human cost, sharing news of which families have come through unscathed and which have suffered loss. This renewal of connection quickly transforms into a renewal of collective action. The immense work of rebuilding is too great for any one family to face alone. One neighbor's small barn, its roof having collapsed under the weight of the spring melt, becomes a focal point for the entire community. One morning, you join the others, arriving with your tools and your strength. The men work together, their movements efficient and coordinated, a silent understanding passing between them. They pull away the ruined timbers, and, with the sound of hammers and saws ringing out in the clear spring air, they begin to raise a new roof. Their combined strength makes a task that would have been impossible for one, manageable for all.
The women, meanwhile, create a center of gravity of their own, preparing a vast communal meal, sharing precious, dwindling supplies to create a feast. They trade news and recipes, their conversation a vital current of information that binds the families together. And the children, released from their long winter confinement, rediscover the simple joy of play. Their laughter, a sound so long absent that it feels like a miracle in itself. For the native peoples of the plains, the arrival of spring signals a different kind of communal reawakening. Their focus is not on mending static structures, but on rejoining the great, dynamic rhythms of the awakening earth. The large winter camps in the sheltered river valleys begin to break up. Families pack their warm, efficient teepees and their belongings onto the travois that will be pulled by their horses. Their movements are not random. They are guided by an ancient and intimate knowledge of the land. They are following the first green shoots of the prairie grasses, and they are following the great herds of buffalo that are, in turn, following the grass. For them, spring is a time of movement, of flowing out from the static security of the winter camp back into the vast open spaces of their ancestral lands. Their gatherings are for ceremony, for rituals of profound thanksgiving for the survival of their people and for the generosity of the earth in bringing forth new life from the cold, muddy ground. In the evenings, after the hard day's labor of mending or preparing the fields, the settlers gather. It might be for a church service or simply a few families crowded into one small cabin. The air, thick with the smell of wood smoke and cooking food, is now also filled with the sound of a fiddle striking up a lively, hopeful tune. The simple joy of being in the company of others, of sharing a story and a laugh, is a balm to the soul after the deep, profound loneliness of the winter. They are weaving their individual threads of experience, their fears, their small victories, their moments of despair and hope, into a single shared narrative. It is the story of the great storm, a story that will be told and retold, becoming a part of the founding legend of their small community, a testament not just to their individual toughness, but to their collective resilience. You have not just survived an ordeal, you have earned a new and deeper understanding of your connection to each other, a connection forged in the heart of the great cold.
With the bonds of community reforged and the most urgent repairs made, the focus of your life shifts from the collective back to the solitary, from the act of mending what was to the act of creating what will be. You now stand at the edge of the small field you have claimed from the vast prairie, the plot of land that represents your future. The ground, saturated and muddy from the great melt, has finally begun to dry under the strengthening sun. It is now ready. You press your hand into the soil. It is cool, damp, and yielding, a stark contrast to the frozen iron it has been for the past 5 months. And in its dark, rich texture, you can feel the immense sleeping potential of the coming season. The great communal effort of rebuilding is giving way to the quiet, personal dialogue between you and the land. The first task is one of pure brute force, breaking the prairie. The ground beneath your feet is not the soft, tilled earth of an eastern farm. It is a dense, formidable mat of grass roots, a tangled web that has grown undisturbed for thousands of years, so thick and tough that early settlers claimed it could wear out a new plowshare in a single day. You lean into the handles of your simple plow, your body braced, and call to your horse or your ox. The animal strains, its muscles bunched, and the iron blade bites into the sod with a great, tearing, screaming sound. Turning the soil here is not a gentle act. It is a battle, a slow, arduous process of ripping open the ancient, resistant skin of the earth to reveal the fertile darkness beneath. Each furrow you carve is a testament to your will, a thin line of human intention drawn across the face of the wilderness. With a small section of the field finally prepared, you retrieve your most valuable possession, the thing more precious than your tools, your cabin, or even your livestock. It is your store of seeds. Kept safe and dry through the long winter, this small leather pouch or wooden box contains the entirety of your hope for the coming year. These are not just dried kernels of corn, beans, and squash. They are living libraries of genetic information, a direct, unbroken link to the successful harvests of the past, and the only blueprint you have for the harvests of the future. You handle them with a reverence born of this understanding. The act of planting is slow and deliberate. You walk the newly turned furrows, placing each seed into the soil by hand, a quiet prayer or a simple heartfelt wish accompanying each one. You have survived the winter's attempt to take life away. Now you are participating in the great, mysterious act of putting life back into the world. But the end of winter's great monolithic threat does not mean an end to anxiety. It is merely replaced by a new and varied host of smaller, but no less potent fears. You find yourself constantly scanning the sky, but you are no longer looking for the heavy gray clouds of a blizzard. Now you watch for the dark, bruised-looking clouds that can build on a warm afternoon, the kind that carry the devastating power of a hailstorm, which can flatten an entire field of tender young plants in a matter of minutes. You wake in the night not to check the fire, but to feel the air, to see if a late, killing frost is descending to blight the new growth, and always in the back of your mind is the memory of the previous summer's drought and the historical terror of the great locust plagues that could sweep across the plains like a devouring army, leaving nothing but bare earth behind. You have made your wager. You have placed your precious seeds, your labor, and all your hope into the soil. You have entered into the great gamble of spring, and all you can do now is work and watch and wait.
The great, back-breaking labor of planting is done. The field, which for days was the site of a constant, noisy struggle between human, animal, and earth, now lies quiet under the spring sky. A new and different kind of work begins, a work of the eyes and the spirit. It is the vigil. Each morning and again each evening as the afternoon light softens, you walk the perimeter of the plowed ground. It looks no different from the day you planted it, a dark, silent rectangle of earth. You are not looking for anything you expect to see. Not yet. You are simply bearing witness, holding the space with your hope and listening. After the intense, desperate action of the winter and the frantic, purposeful labor of the spring, this period of forced stillness, of patient trust in an invisible process, is a challenge of its own. You have made your offering to the land. Now you must wait for its response. But while your small field lies dormant, the great, wild prairie around you is erupting with a furious, joyful return to life. The uniform brown of the muddy, post-thaw landscape is being rapidly overthrown by a wave of vibrant green. The new grasses, nourished by the meltwater, are growing so fast you can almost perceive the change from one day to the next. The air, which for months held only the sterile scent of ice, is now thick with the complex perfumes of damp earth, budding leaves, and the first shy prairie wildflowers. And the silence, the vast, profound silence of the winter, is being joyously dismantled. The sky is now a great highway for the returning migratory birds. You see the vast V-shaped skeins of geese returning to their northern nesting grounds, their calls echoing across the plains. You hear the fluting, liquid song of the meadowlark, a sound that, more than any other, is the true anthem of the prairie spring. The world is reawakening,
And your small, silent field is a part of this great continental unfurling of life. Hope, however, is not a passive strategy. You know that the success of the seeds you have planted depends entirely on the one resource you cannot control: water. The memory of the previous summer's drought is a fresh and potent anxiety. While you wait for the seeds to sprout, you turn your labor to the task of managing this precious resource. You spend your days by the creek that marks the edge of your property, its waters now running full and fast with the last of the melt. With a spade and your own sheer effort, you begin to deepen a small winding channel, a simple irrigation ditch that leads from the creek to the edge of your field. It is another act of imposing a thin line of human intention upon the land, a humble attempt to mitigate the great gamble you have taken, to provide a lifeline for your crop should the generous spring rains fail to appear. Then, one morning, it happens. You are making your daily pilgrimage to the field, your eyes scanning the dark, familiar soil. But today, something is different. There, pushing its way up through a crumb of earth, is a tiny, exquisitely delicate loop of green. You kneel down, your heart suddenly beating faster. It is the first sprout. A day later, it is joined by another, and then a dozen more, and then 100, until the entire field is stippled with these faint green stitches, sewing a pattern of life onto the dark fabric of the soil. The relief is a physical thing, a great silent weight lifting from your shoulders. It is the confirmation. The seeds were alive. The soil has accepted them. The warmth and the water have done their mysterious work. Your gamble has paid its first miraculous dividend. You reach out, and with a gentleness you did not know you possessed, you touch the tender shoot. It is a moment of profound and quiet connection, a silent promise between you and the great creative power of the earth. The vigil is over. The long, patient work of nurturing is about to begin. The first miraculous appearance of the sprouts quickly gives way to a new and demanding reality. Hope, which was once a distant, abstract concept, has now taken root in the earth, and it requires constant, back-breaking work to protect. The vigil of watching is over, replaced by the long, arduous labor of nurturing. Your days now find a new rhythm, one that is dictated not by the fire or the storm, but by the needs of these fragile, green lives. You are no longer just a survivor. You have become a guardian, and the field is your sole focus. The primary enemy in this new season is not the cold, but the competition, the same sun and rain that coax your precious crops from the soil also awaken the formidable native life of the prairie. The wild grasses and weeds whose ancestors have been perfecting the art of survival on this land for 10,000 years are far more aggressive and resilient than your domesticated corn and beans. And so your days are spent in a slow, grinding, and seemingly endless war against these invaders. You work on your hands and knees, moving meticulously down each row, the sun hot on your back, pulling each weed by hand. It is a battle for resources, for sunlight, for water, for nutrients in the soil. Each weed you remove is a small victory, a temporary reclaiming of this small patch of earth for the life you have chosen to cultivate. It is humbling work, a constant reminder that your act of farming is not a conquest of the land, but a temporary, negotiated truce with an immensely powerful and patient wilderness,
that is always waiting to reclaim what was once its own. This new, more complex relationship extends to the animal life that is returning to the prairie in droves. In the depths of winter, the sight of a rabbit or a deer would have been a welcome promise of a fresh meal. Now, these same creatures are a source of deep anxiety. You watch with a mixture of awe and trepidation as a doe and her fawn emerge from the tree line at dusk, their elegant forms a beautiful symbol of the land's returning vitality. But the next morning, your heart sinks as you discover the tender tops of a dozen young bean plants have been neatly clipped off. The wild, which you have so long been a part of, is now a threat to the future you are trying to build. And so, a new kind of labor begins: the building of a fence. It is a simple thing, made of brush and woven branches, but it is another profound act of separation, another line drawn between your small, ordered human world and the wild, untamed world that surrounds it. Yet, this wild world is not only a threat, it remains a source of sustenance. While you fight to protect the life you have planted, the prairie itself offers its own gifts. After a long day of weeding, you might walk the damp ground near the creek, your eyes scanning not for threats, but for opportunities. You find a patch of wild onions, their sharp green shoots a welcome sight. You gather the tender young leaves of dandelions, a plant you know to be rich in the vitamins your body has craved all winter. This is a different kind of harvest, one that requires not the hard labor of the plow, but the soft knowledge of the forager. That evening, you eat a meal that is transformed. The sharp, peppery taste of the fresh greens, wilted into a simple stew, is an explosion of flavor, a shocking and joyful contrast to the salty, monotonous diet of the winter. It is a reminder that your survival depends on a delicate dance, a constant negotiation between controlling the land and gratefully accepting the wild abundance it chooses to offer.
The gentle, nurturing warmth of spring slowly, almost imperceptibly, begins to harden. The sun, which was a welcome and life-giving presence, ascends higher in the sky each day, its gaze becoming more intense, more demanding. High summer has arrived on the prairie, and with it comes a new and formidable adversary. The great monolithic enemy of the cold has been defeated, but it has been replaced by its opposite, an equally powerful and impartial tyrant, the heat. The vibrant, almost fluorescent green of the spring landscape begins to cure under the relentless sun, fading to the pale gold and dusty brown of the arid months. You have survived the trial by ice. Now you must endure the trial by fire. Your field, at least, is a testament to the promise of spring. It is an island of deep, lush green in the increasingly parched landscape. The corn you so carefully planted is now a thriving forest in miniature, the stalks growing so high that you can lose sight of your cabin from the middle of a row. The broad leaves of the squash plants spread across the ground, creating a living mulch that helps to preserve the precious moisture in the soil. The sight of it is a source of profound, quiet satisfaction. It is the visible, tangible proof of your labor, a living monument to the hope that you held on to through the long, dark winter. But this thriving crop, this beautiful emblem of your success, now represents everything you have to lose. It is a great green wager, and the stakes grow higher with each passing cloudless day. The central conflict of your life is no longer the battle for warmth, but the desperate, ongoing struggle for water. The generous rains of spring have become a distant memory. The creek, which was a rushing torrent during the thaw, has now shrunk to a lazy, shallow stream that barely moves between its banks. The small irrigation ditch you dug is now a vital artery, the sole lifeline for your thirsty crops. Your days are spent carefully managing its flow, creating small temporary dams of mud and stone to guide the precious dwindling supply of water to the roots of the wilting corn. You watch the sky with the same intensity you once reserved for reading the signs of a blizzard. You study the formation of the clouds, hoping for the dark, heavy bottoms that promise rain, and fearing the high, wispy mare's tails that signal only more dry, windy weather to come. The land is thirsty, and you can feel its pain in the cracking of the earth beneath your feet, and in the slight, weary curl of the corn leaves in the brutal midday sun. This pervasive dryness gives birth to another, more terrifying threat, the prairie fire. In the late afternoon, as the day's heat begins to wane, you develop a new ritual. You stand outside your cabin and slowly, methodically scan the entire unbroken circle of the horizon. You are searching for the faintest, darkest wisp of smoke, the telltale sign of a lightning strike or a spark from a distant railroad that could, in this tinder-dry landscape, become a life-consuming inferno in a matter of hours. You have heard the stories of these fires, of great, devouring walls of flame moving across the prairie faster than a horse can run, leaving nothing behind but blackened, smoking earth. Your only defense is to create a shield of bare soil, a wide, plowed fire break that circles your entire homestead. It is another act of immense labor, another thin line of human hope drawn against the overwhelming power of the land. And your cabin, which was your fortress against the cold, has now become its opposite, a cool, dark cave, a refuge where you retreat during the hottest hours of the day, waiting for the evening to bring its small measure of relief.
For weeks, the sun has been an adversary, the sky a vast and empty vessel of heat. You have endured its tyranny, protecting your small patch of life with shade, water, and constant vigilance. Then, one afternoon, a change begins. The air, which has been thin and dry, grows heavy and still. On the western horizon, a line of clouds begins to build, not the wispy, impotent clouds of the drought, but great, towering thunderheads, their bottoms a dark, bruised purple. A low, almost imperceptible rumble vibrates through the soles of your feet. A summer thunderstorm is gathering its power. As it rolls in, the sky darkens, and a cool wind, smelling of rain and ozone, rushes ahead of it, a blessed relief from the stagnant heat. The storm that arrives is not gentle. It is a spectacle of immense, violent power. Lightning splits the sky, and the thunder that follows is a deafening, percussive roar that seems to shake the very foundations of your cabin. The rain comes not as a shower, but as a torrential, wind-driven deluge. You watch from your window, your heart caught between fear and hope, knowing that this same storm, with its life-giving water, could also flatten your entire crop with a sudden burst of hail. The storm passes as quickly as it arrived, leaving a world washed clean in its wake. You step outside into the cool, dripping aftermath. The dust that has coated every surface for months is gone. The air is fresh and alive, and the parched earth has turned a deep, dark, satisfying black, drinking in the moisture it has so desperately craved. And your field, your precious field, is not flattened. It is standing tall, vibrant, and renewed, every leaf glistening with water. The long, desperate crisis of the heat is over. The land has been granted a reprieve. A few days later, you walk into the field, and you know the time has come. The long, patient work of nurturing is about to be rewarded. You move to the first row of bean plants, the vines heavy with long green pods. You reach out and pluck one, the satisfying crisp snap as it comes free, a sound of pure success. You find the first summer squash, its skin smooth and its body heavy with dense, sweet flesh. And you go to the tallest stalks of corn,
pulling back the green husk to reveal the tightly packed rows of pale, milky kernels within. That evening, you prepare a meal unlike any you have eaten in nearly a year. You feast on boiled sweet corn, on fresh beans, on roasted squash. The taste is a revelation. After a year of the monotonous, one-dimensional flavors of salted meat, dried beans, and hearty root vegetables, the fresh, sweet, vibrant taste of this food, grown from your own soil by your own hands, is an experience so profound it is almost overwhelming. This is not just food. It is security. It is the taste of a future. It is the edible, tangible proof that you have not just survived, but that you are beginning to thrive. But the hard-won wisdom of the great winter has taught you a crucial lesson. The bounty of summer is not just for the summer. It is a loan from the future, a resource that must be carefully managed and stored for the lean times that you know with absolute certainty will return. And so, even in the midst of this joyful abundance, a new, more hopeful kind of work begins. You spend the long, warm afternoons shelling the mature beans, spreading the dried kernels on a blanket in the sun, preparing the protein that will sustain you through the next winter. You select the finest, most perfect ears of corn, not for eating, but for seed, carefully hanging them to dry in a safe place, preserving the genetic promise of an even better harvest next year. You are no longer simply reacting to the present. You are actively provisioning the future. The cycle of the seasons is no longer a force that happens to you. It is a great wheel that you are now helping to turn, a conscious and active partner in the great unfolding story of the land.
The first joyful harvest of summer's tender vegetables slowly gives way to the great, serious work of the autumn. The character of the light begins to change, the harsh, white glare of summer softening into a rich, golden hue that slants across the prairie in the late afternoons. The air itself is different. The days are still warm, but the nights are now filled with a distinct, refreshing crispness that speaks of the coming frost. The great wheel of the year is turning toward its completion, and a new and urgent kind of labor begins. It is the race against time, the great gathering of the staple crops that will mean the difference between security and starvation in the winter that you know is waiting on the far side of the season. The main event, the true climax of the farming year, is the corn harvest. Your small field of corn, which has grown into a dense, rustling forest, is now ready. The stalks are dry and brittle, the leaves a pale, papery brown, and the ears hang heavy, their husks dry and loose. This is a task too great to be undertaken alone. One morning, you see your neighbors arriving in their wagon, a silent, understood offering of their labor, just as you will offer yours to them when their own crop is ready. Together, you move through the rows, the air filled with the dry, rustling music of the stalks and the rhythmic thud of harvested ears being tossed into the wagon. The work is hard and dusty, but it is done with a light heart. That evening, the work continues in a more social setting. The entire community might gather for a husking bee, a celebration disguised as a chore. Under the light of lanterns, surrounded by friends and neighbors, you all work to peel the dry husks from the corn, your hands moving automatically while you share stories and songs. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated abundance, a joyful culmination of the entire year's struggle. From the golden bounty of the cornfield, your attention turns to the hidden treasures still waiting in the earth. You take a spade and a basket to the field and begin the satisfying work of digging up the root vegetables. You push the spade into the cool, dark soil and turn it over, revealing a clutch of
perfectly formed potatoes. You pull on the feathery tops of the carrots, and they emerge from the ground, their bright orange a startling splash of color. This is the heavy, dense, caloric bedrock of your winter diet, the food that will fuel your body's furnace through the coldest months. You carry them, basket by basket, to your root cellar, a small, dark, underground chamber you prepared in the summer. Down in the cool, earthy-smelling darkness, you carefully store them. This small, subterranean space is your treasury, a vault where you deposit the stored sunlight and captured rainwater of the summer to be withdrawn as needed during the long, dark winter. Your cabin, too, is transformed by this great gathering. It is no longer just a shelter. It has become a larder, a library of food. Great braided strings of dried corn, their kernels like golden jewels, hang from the rafters. Sacks filled with thousands of hard, dry beans are stacked neatly in a corner. Strings of wild onions or peppers you may have grown hang near the stove, their savory scent filling the air. Every available space is filled with the tangible, physical evidence of the land's generosity and your own hard labor. And with this abundance comes a feeling that you have not known for a very long time, a profound and quiet sense of security. You remember the grim, anxious arithmetic of the previous winter, the fearful counting of your dwindling supplies. Now you can look around you and know with a deep and satisfying certainty that you have enough. You have done the work. You have learned the lessons of the land. You are ready for what is to come. The days grow noticeably shorter now, the golden light of autumn giving way to long, cool evenings. A new and profound silence begins to settle over the prairie. The constant, buzzing chorus of summer insects has faded, and the great, noisy flocks of migratory birds have now departed, their calls a fading memory on the wind. Then, one morning, you wake to a world transformed by the first hard frost. Every surface, every blade of dry grass, every branch, the roof of your cabin is coated in a breathtakingly intricate layer of white crystals that glitter in the pale morning sun. It is an event of stark and stunning beauty, but it is also a declaration. The growing season is over. The great, slow turn back towards the cold has truly begun. The few deciduous trees along the creek, the cottonwoods and aspens, now answer this signal, their leaves erupting into a final defiant blaze of brilliant yellow against the deep, cloudless blue of the autumn sky. This is the time for the final preparations, the last acts of fortification before the land is once again locked down by the winter. But the work this year is different. It is not done with the frantic, uncertain energy of a newcomer, but with the quiet, efficient confidence of a veteran. You mix a fresh batch of chinking, a thick plaster of clay, sand, and dried prairie grass, and you go over every inch of your cabin's walls. You know now, from the bitter experience of the previous winter, exactly where the wind will probe. You remember the fine jet of snow that forced its way through a tiny gap near the window, the persistent draft that chilled the floorboards in the corner. You seal these weaknesses with a meticulous and personal knowledge. You are not just winterizing a home. You are correcting the mistakes of your former, more ignorant self. You stack the last of your firewood or buffalo chips in a neat, high wall along the side of the cabin, a tangible monument to your foresight and labor. As you work, you can feel the change not just in the land,
but within yourself. You pause and look out at the vast golden landscape, and you remember the person you were just 1 year ago. You remember the easy, unexamined optimism, the casual assumption that the land would always provide, that the winters would always be mild. You remember the fear of the unknown, the terror of that first great blizzard. That person is gone, replaced by someone quieter, humbler, but infinitely stronger. The fear has been replaced by a deep and abiding respect. You can now feel the subtle shifts in the wind's direction and know what they portend. You can look at the behavior of the few remaining birds and the frantic last-minute work of the squirrels and understand their warnings. You have learned the land's difficult language, and it has, in turn, made you a part of its story. This newfound wisdom brings not arrogance, but a quiet sense of peace. Your larder is full, your shelter is secure, your knowledge is hard-won and reliable. The great existential anxieties of the previous year have been replaced by a pragmatic understanding of the challenges ahead. You know the cold will be brutal. You know the confinement will be long. You know the work of survival will be hard. But you also know that you have the tools, the resources, and the resilience to face it. You have been through the fire, or rather, the ice, and you have come out the other side, forged into something new. And so, one late afternoon, as you stand outside your newly sealed cabin in the crisp, cold air, it happens. A single, perfect, six-pointed snowflake drifts down from the gray sky and lands on the sleeve of your wool coat. You watch it for a moment before it melts. Last year, this sight would have sent a jolt of fear through you. This year, you feel something entirely different. A calm, steady, and quiet readiness. You have come full circle. Let the winter come.
The single snowflake is a messenger, a quiet harbinger of the great change to come. In the days that follow, the sky remains a high, cold gray, and the air carries a new and unmistakable density. Then, one evening, the invasion begins again. But this time, it is not a violent, shrieking blizzard that tears at the world. It is a slow, gentle, and profoundly silent snowfall. The flakes are large and heavy, drifting down without the persuasion of the wind, each one a perfect, intricate star. You watch from your window as the golden autumn landscape is slowly, methodically put to bed under a soft white blanket. The sharp edges of the world are softened once more, and a deep and peaceful hush descends. Last year, this sight was the beginning of a long and terrifying ordeal. This year, you watch it with a quiet and knowing calm. It does not feel like an attack. It feels like a homecoming. The morning after the first significant snow is not a moment of panic, but a seamless transition into a familiar and well-practiced rhythm. You wake in the cold, dark cabin, but there is no hesitation, no need to summon your courage. You move with an effortless efficiency born of 1,000 repetitions. The revival of the fire from the perfectly banked embers of the night before is a smooth, predictable process. The journey to the barn is not a desperate scramble, but a calm and purposeful chore. Your animals, fat and healthy from a summer of good grazing, greet you with a placid indifference to the weather, their bodies well prepared for the season. You provide them with the first of the sweet, fragrant hay you harvested and stored with your own hands. A satisfying, full-circle moment. The entire morning routine, which was once a desperate, minute-by-minute battle for survival,
has now become a graceful and unconscious dance. The confinement of this new winter is also a different country. The cabin, now meticulously sealed against the wind and filled to the rafters with the bounty of your harvest, is no longer a prison, but a true sanctuary. The long evenings, once a source of dread and a breeding ground for cabin fever, are now a welcome gift. They are a time for chosen rest, a time to allow the body to recover from the immense season-long labor of farming. You sit by the warm, steady glow of the stove, the howling of the wind outside, no longer the voice of a ravenous monster, but a wild and familiar music that serves only to deepen the sense of your own safety and comfort. You pick up the piece of wood you began carving last winter, or the sock you were knitting, and the work of your hands is not a desperate defense against madness, but a peaceful, productive, and satisfying way to pass the quiet hours. You have learned not just to endure the winter, but to inhabit it. In these long, quiet hours of reflection, you come to understand the true nature of the transformation you have undergone. You look at your hands, and you see not just the calluses of a farmer, but the repository of a deep and intricate knowledge. You know how to read the subtle language of a winter sky. You know the precise alchemy of wood, air, and ash required to keep a fire alive through a 14-hour night. You know the difference between the hunger of a mild cold and the soul-deep ache of a killing frost. You possess a library of skills and senses that the person you were a year ago could not have even imagined. And you realize that this knowledge, this hard-won, practical wisdom, is the most valuable thing you own. It is a legacy, a form of wealth that cannot be lost or stolen. It is the wisdom you will one day pass on to your children, or to the next family of hopeful, naive settlers who arrive in this beautiful and unforgiving land. You are no longer just a survivor. You have become a keeper of the flame, a living link in the long, unbroken chain of human resilience.
And so, we leave our traveler there, in the quiet solitude of their second winter. We leave them not in a state of fear or desperation, but in a state of grace, sitting by a steady fire as the snow falls silently on a world they now understand. They have completed the great circle. They have endured the worst the land could unleash and have learned its deepest lessons. Their story, which began in a moment of crisis, now settles into a quiet, sustainable rhythm. They have become a part of the landscape, their life now woven into the great recurring tapestry of the seasons. Over these past nights, we have walked with them on their journey. We have felt the bite of the blizzard's wind and the profound relief of a neighbor's warm hearth. We have witnessed the terror of the thaw and the quiet miracle of the first green sprout. We have followed a single human life through a crucible, a year-long trial by the elements that burned away a naive faith in a gentle world and forged, in its place, a profound and durable wisdom. The story of surviving the great cold was never just about the mechanics of staying warm. It was the story of learning a forgotten language. It was about learning to read the subtle grammar of the sky, to understand the history written in the texture of the snow, and to hear the warnings spoken on the wind. The great lesson our traveler learned, the lesson that is etched into the heart of this story, is that survival on this planet is not a matter of conquering nature, but of understanding it. The opposite of fear is not courage, it is knowledge. They survived not by imposing their will upon the land, but by entering into a deep and respectful dialogue with it. They learned to anticipate its moods, to prepare for its furies, and to gratefully accept its gifts. They learned that a community is not just a collection of people, but a shared repository of wisdom and strength. And they learned that true security
is not found in the absence of hardship, but in the earned confidence that you have the skill, the foresight, and the resilience to meet it when it arrives. We now return from that distant fire-lit cabin to the comfort of our own present moment. The challenges faced by the frontier settler can seem impossibly remote to us. Our shelters are warmed at the touch of a button, our larders are filled from stores that span the globe, and the voice of the winter wind is, for most of us, a distant sound on the other side of a double-paned window. We have wrapped our lives in a remarkable buffer of technology, a buffer that has protected us from the raw, elemental realities of the world, but may have also disconnected us from its deeper rhythms. Yet, the wisdom of our traveler's journey remains. The great wheel of the seasons still turns. The fundamental human need for warmth, for shelter, for community, and for a hopeful vision of the future has not changed. And so, perhaps the next time you feel a cool draft on a winter's night, or watch a storm gather on the horizon, you will remember this story. You will remember the true, profound meaning of a simple fire, and the quiet, unyielding strength that is forged when we learn to listen with respect and with patience to the great unfolding story of the earth.